Hi, this is Chandler Holloway for Casio with part 3 of the song mode tutorial series. Although the CT-X models have a great selection of preset songs and rhythms, working with custom user data is the key to maximizing the potential of these instruments. We've only really dealt with the built-in content so far, but all the videos in part 3 will be about importing and exporting your own user data. In this video, I'm going to start things off with an overview of the 3 different types of song data files on the CT-X700 and 800. The next 2 videos will cover the 2 different methods you can use for data transfer, and for the last video in part 3, I'll explain how to supplement the preset song library by importing MIDI files for use with the built-in lesson features. So on the CT-X700, the CT-X800, and the CDP-S350, we have 3 different types of song files, which are multi-track recordings, lesson recordings, and user MIDI songs. Before we get into the specific features of each file type, let's start off with something they all have in common. They are not audio files, but rather song sequence data. WAV or MP3 format files are not compatible with these keyboards, so you can't directly import them to the onboard memory. However, if you want to practice with or perform on top of music from somewhere like Spotify or YouTube, you can always use the 1/8" audio input on the back panel to overlay that audio on top of the sounds coming from the keyboard. The CT-X models even have a cool little shelf on the front panel to hold your phone or other small devices. And if you need to, you can attach the music rest for larger things like tablets or tabletop synthesizers. Multitrack song recordings, or .mrf files, are the most convenient song file to work with when it comes to composing music on the keyboard itself. When inspiration strikes and you need to lay down some scratch tracks right away, the immediacy of setting up a recording with one button press, plus the versatility of 6 separate tracks, is more than enough to get the job done. It's not just good for demos, though. If you're looking to record a solo piano performance or some riffing on top of a rhythm, you can easily get a high-quality recording on your first few takes. Out of all 3 song types, the MRF sequence file is the best format for preserving a project because it will sound the closest to the original recording in terms of the tones and effects used. It's also the only song file type that can still be edited after it's archived and imported back to the keyboard. So if you have an ongoing multi-track song project you want to temporarily set aside to clear up space for a new recording, it's best to export that file in MRF format to ensure you can resume your work when you transfer it back later. One drawback is that because this format has functionality that is proprietary to the multi-track recorders on these particular keyboards, you can't freely edit or play back MRF recordings on anything else. However, you can still convert your MRF sequence into a different, more widely compatible format if you want to share it around or edit it on your computer using a digital audio workstation. Fortunately, it just so happens that our next song file type is one of those widely compatible formats. A user MIDI song, sometimes called a standard MIDI format or SMF file, uses the .mid file extension. This is an industry-standard sequence data format that's been in place for decades now, favored for its compatibility with music software, arranger keyboards, and pro-level workstations. Unlike multi-track MRF sequences, there is no way to directly edit MIDI files on the keyboard itself. But when you consider external editing capabilities, a MIDI file is still overall the most flexible and tweakable song type supported by these instruments. It can take a bit of extra effort to edit these files using external software or music gear, but when you're working with a fully featured MIDI sequencer, you gain access to 16 freely editable tracks plus features that aren't available with the onboard recorder, like quantization, per-note velocity adjustment, and advanced tone editing with CC messages, just to name a few. A finely tuned MIDI file makes for a precise and reliable one-touch backing track that's ideal for performance or practice settings. You could also use an audio player to handle backing tracks like we talked about before, but playing along to a MIDI track does offer some distinct advantages. For example, a MIDI song can be transposed in half steps if you want to perform it in a different key. Or even slightly detuned for more tonal precision. You can also change the playback speed of your song simply by setting a new tempo with the onboard controls. Audio files can do similar things with extra post-processing, but MIDI songs can handle these adjustments on the fly without any loss in sound quality. Another common use for MIDI files is importing new songs to practice in lesson mode. And on that note, we have our third and final file type for this video, lesson recordings, which use the .lrf extension. We already covered how to create lesson recordings in the final video for part 2 of this series. But as far as the technical aspects are concerned, a lesson recording is really just a user MIDI file with 1 or 2 parts removed and replaced with your performance during a lesson. When you select a song for lesson recording, switching between a left, right, or both hand lesson will determine whether the left-hand track, the right-hand track, or both tracks will be overwritten by your recorded performance in the finished file. However, keep in mind that once an LRF file is created, there's no way to modify the recording, either through the onboard controls or exporting it to an external editor. This strict limitation makes lesson recordings an ideal way to turn in assignments in a classroom setting, as it prevents any method of doctoring the recording before or after the fact. Maximizing the utility of custom MIDI files with the built-in practice features in Lesson Recorder can sometimes require extra tweaking to make sure everything works properly, both in terms of setting up your source MIDI file externally and changing the onboard lesson settings. That being said, this absolute roller coaster ride of a lecture about file types is really starting to get my heart rate up, so for the sake of my health and safety, unfortunately, I think we'll have to save that discussion for the last video in part 3. Remember to like this video and subscribe to the Casio Music Gear channel for more tutorial content, and as always, feel free to ask any questions you might have in the comments down below. This has been Chandler Holloway for Casio. Thanks for watching.